They were here first. For 200,000 years, they had Europe to themselves. They buried their dead, cared for their injured, made jewelry, possibly made art. They were not primitive. They were not stupid. They were a different kind of human, shaped by a different evolutionary path, adapted to cold climates in ways that modern humans were not. And then we arrived, and within 40,000 years, they were gone. What happened in between is one of the most contested, most uncomfortable, and most personally relevant questions in all of human science. Because the answer is not simple, and because whatever happened between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, the evidence suggests you are living with the consequences of it right now in your own genome. Here is what the textbooks give you. Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, diverged from the lineage shared with modern humans somewhere between 400,000 and 800,000 years ago. They were physically robust, shorter and stockier than modern humans, with larger brow ridges, larger nasal cavities adapted for warming cold air, and significantly larger brains, in absolute terms on average slightly larger than modern human brains, though differently organized. They were skilled hunters, capable of taking down large prey, including mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses. They used fire. They made tools of considerable sophistication under what archaeologists call the Mousterian tradition. They lived in small, tight-knit groups across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans arrived. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, arrived in Europe from Africa approximately 45,000 years ago. The fossil and archaeological record suggests that Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted in Europe for somewhere between 2,600 and 5,000 years before the Neanderthals disappeared from the record entirely, approximately 40,000 years ago. What happened during those few thousand years of coexistence is where the science gets complicated, contested, and deeply strange. Paleoanthropologist João Zilhão at the University of Barcelona, whose work on Neanderthal symbolic behavior and the timing of their disappearance has repeatedly challenged conventional narratives, has argued against the simple replacement model, the idea that modern humans simply outcompeted or eliminated Neanderthals. His analysis of sites in the Iberian Peninsula suggests that Neanderthals were producing symbolic ornaments, pierced and ochre-stained shells, before modern humans arrived in Europe, independently and without influence from Homo sapiens. This matters because symbolic thought was long considered the cognitive advantage that modern humans held over Neanderthals. If Neanderthals were independently producing symbolic objects, the cognitive gap between the two species was smaller than previously assumed. The question of violence is real and cannot be avoided. There is archaeological evidence of Neanderthal bones with cut marks consistent with butchering found at sites in Europe. Whether this represents cannibalism practiced by Neanderthals on other Neanderthals, cannibalism practiced by modern humans on Neanderthals, or mortuary practices in which the flesh was removed from the bones of the dead for ritual purposes, is not fully resolved. The evidence for direct violent conflict between modern humans and Neanderthals is suggestive but not definitive. What is clear is that the demographic pressure created by a larger, faster expanding, more socially connected modern human population would have been enough by itself to drive a small population species to extinction over several thousand years, even without a single violent confrontation. But here is where the story becomes genuinely strange, and where it stops being ancient history and starts being about you specifically. In 2010, geneticist Svante Pääbo and his team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published the first draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome. What they found changed everything. Modern humans of non-African ancestry carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, not as a contamination artifact, as genuine inherited genetic material integrated into the modern human genome through interbreeding that occurred while both species were alive and in contact. You are, in a measurable and specific sense, part Neanderthal. The implications of this finding are still being worked through. Subsequent research has identified specific Neanderthal genetic variants that are still present in modern human populations and that have measurable effects on modern human biology. Some of these variants affect immune function. Neanderthal immune genes appear to have given modern humans arriving in Europe a useful adaptation to pathogens that Neanderthals had been exposed to for hundreds of thousands of years. Some variants affect skin and hair characteristics. Some appear to affect susceptibility to certain diseases. A 2020 study found that a cluster of Neanderthal-derived genetic variants significantly increases the risk of severe COVID-19 outcomes in modern humans. A piece of ancient DNA still producing consequences in a 21st century pandemic. The Neanderthals are not gone. They are distributed in fragments across the genomes of every non-African person alive today. Here is the truth drop, and it reframes one of the most common assumptions about human history. The dominant cultural narrative about what happened between modern humans and Neanderthals has always been one of competition and replacement. Us versus them, our species winning, their species losing. This narrative maps neatly onto later patterns of human history, where one group replaces another through conquest, displacement, or elimination. It is a familiar story, and it feels explanatory. But the genetic evidence tells a more complicated story. The boundary between us and them was not clean. It was not maintained. At some point, in some places, modern humans and Neanderthals did not just coexist. They formed relationships across the species boundary. Relationships intimate enough to produce children who survived and reproduced and carried that genetic material forward into the present. Whatever conflict or competition also occurred, it was not the whole story. The story also includes contact, familiarity, and integration at the most fundamental biological level possible. Geneticist David Reich at Harvard, whose work on ancient DNA has transformed our understanding of human prehistory, has argued that the history of our species is not a history of isolated populations replacing each other. It is a history of constant mixing, merging, and exchange. Populations coming into contact, exchanging genes, sometimes exchanging cultures, and producing the complex genetic and cultural landscape of the present. The Neanderthals are one chapter of that story, not the ones who lost, the ones who became part of us. So what do you do with this? The next time you encounter a narrative about an us and a them, two groups in opposition, one destined to replace the other, notice what the Neanderthal story actually looks like up close. It looks like tens of thousands of years of coexistence. It looks like cultural exchange. It looks like interbreeding across a boundary that the modern mind would have drawn as absolute. It looks like the boundary between self and other being far more permeable at the biological level than any ideology of difference has ever been willing to admit. They were here first, we arrived, and the story of what happened next is written in your genome, in every cell of your body, in the specific immune adaptations and skin characteristics and disease susceptibilities you carry without knowing where they came from. You did not replace the Neanderthals, you carry them, and they, in whatever sense the dead can be said to continue, are still here.